Why are you going to allow that 7 or 10-year-old of who you used to be the dictator or be the driver of your car, your life? And you want to know your proof for how it does not serve you anymore? Take a look at your relationships or your relationships pattern. Have you noticed that they all start off the same? Have you noticed that they end off the same? Have you noticed that you have the same type? Have you ever caught yourself wondering, damn, I keep attracting the same people. I am always dealing with these people. I always get somehow attracted to people who can't communicate, who have trust issues, who X, Y, and Z.
Coming from that pretty mouth, the truth is fitting. Cause you ain't never talking loud and you know plenty. You know what I'm talking about, cause you just get me. Yeah, you so pretty.
Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. It's Divination B, where we talk about self-improvement and spirituality. So as you guys see by the title of the video, we're talking about dissolving the ego. But really quickly, what is the ego, right? Let's get down to it. The ego essentially is your sense of self, your sense of identity, how you view yourself, your self-esteem, different things like that. And essentially what ends up happening is whenever we were all little boys and girls, we kind of get put onto this planet. We don't really have an ego. But as we grow up, our ego starts to develop. And our ego starts to develop from other people. It starts to develop by our family members, by our childhood friends, childhood bullies, things that we got teased about. But essentially, whatever other people told us and we decided to believe that it was true, that was how our ego got built. That starts around 7 to 10 years old. And what ends up happening is, as we start to have that ego that we've had since we were a child, practically, we go out into different relationships, our adult relationships with friends, maybe still those same family members, or now romantic partnerships, and we're finding that they're not working. And when our relationships are not working, us as human beings, because we're so hurt, we start to point the finger at the other person without realizing that this actually has everything to do with you and not the other person. To a certain extent, it's the other person, which we'll get into, but essentially it's about you. When it comes to your ego and it comes to your relationships, you're going to act out the ego that you've known since you were 7 to probably 12 years old, and that will allow you to act certain ways in your relationship. When you take a look at a lot of these relationship expert books, besides the ones that tell you about okay, it's good to communicate, it's good to make sure you're not blaming the other person, but whenever we're talking about, let's say, attachment styles, we're talking about avoidant, we're talking about anxious, we're talking about disorganized attachment styles, and we find people that have this sort of style, 9 times out of 10, when you buy a book that talks about this attachment style, they're always going to lead you back to your childhood. Because 9 times out of 10, it's most likely going to start with your parents. If not your parents, then somebody that you have considered within great importance that has told you something. Somebody that you may have looked up to. Friend, teachers. And they have somehow gave you this narrative or said something to you. And then within your mind, you create this narrative that you are not worthy or good enough. So, when it comes to dissolving the ego, I personally believe, holy crap, that you have to dissolve your ego. You have to kill it. And then allow it to be reborn. A lot of people, especially whenever it comes to a lot of spiritual experts, they think that, well, I'm not even say spiritual experts, but spiritual people, they will say that you don't have to kill your ego. You just have to learn to cope with it, recognize it, and work with it. But I personally believe that that's not true. And this is coming from a Scorpio moon. I've gone through a lot of deaths and rebirths. I've gone through a lot of reprogramming, unprogramming, and changing my viewpoint subconsciously about how I viewed myself. And you have to kill that ego, that part of you that once was. And I say kill it in the sense of do not allow it to have control anymore. Because you now, as an adult, have more awareness, have more emotional regulation. You're more wiser now. It doesn't make sense to have a kid be the driver of a car. Would you honestly be sitting there so comfortably letting your 10-year-old sister or brother driving your car wholeheartedly? You're not worried about them gonna crash your car. You're not worried about your safety, their safety. It doesn't make sense. So when it comes to your ego, because like I said, it gets created from 7 to 10 years old, why are you going to allow that 7 or 10-year-old of who you used to be the dictator or be the driver of your car, your life? It doesn't make sense. So why do you have to dissolve the ego? It's outdated. It does not serve you anymore. And you want to know your proof for how it does not serve you anymore? Take a look at your relationships or your relationships pattern. Have you noticed that they all start off the same? Have you noticed that they end off the same? Have you noticed that you have the same type? Have you ever caught yourself wondering, damn, I keep attracting the same people. I am always dealing with these people. I always get somehow attracted to people who can't communicate, who have trust issues, who X, Y, and Z. Maybe whenever you guys start off in your relationship, it has that little limerence feel. You guys get so attached very quickly. It goes super, super fast, super quickly. Kind of like a snowball effect. And it just builds and builds and builds. It goes super fast. And then it just ends up crashing and burning at the end. Or maybe you fell in love with somebody who was very charismatic, who was very humanitarian-wise, very empathic. But then later on in the relationship, they were completely different from how they used to show themselves to you. Have you? Therefore, when it comes to your relationships, especially if you keep attracting those same type of people, unfortunately, the problem is you. But fortunately, the problem is you. And what I mean by that is, unfortunately, the problem is you, because when it comes to your relationship pattern, the only commonality is you. Ouch. Ouch, ouch, ouch. The only commonality is you. You're the only common person. Whenever it comes to that whole pattern, it's you. But fortunately, the problem is you. As in, you have control of changing you. You can't change those other people, those relationships that you were a part of. But you can change you. You can change your mindset. You can change how you view things. You can trust yourself. You can be more discerning. Which is why dissolving the ego is really important. Because at the end of the day, if you were a little kid and you have abandonment issues, maybe whenever you were a kid you felt like, especially emotionally abandoned. I'm going to use my own personal example. Whenever it came to my mom, I felt like I was emotionally abandoned a lot. Because all the time whenever something would happen between us, she would go ahead and speak her side. But once it was time for me to speak up, it was shut up. Or if I was not told to shut up, she would physically walk away from me, as if what I had to say was not important. She would try to change the subject. She might even ask me a question just to get me to stop talking about whatever it is that I'm talking about, because it makes her uncomfortable. Or whenever I would sit there and try to communicate with her how I was feeling, I was gaslit or manipulated, or somehow, some way there was a miscommunication, which ended up making me feel misunderstood. Because she didn't want. I feel like at that moment, her feelings were much more important than mine. So, at the end of the day, what I had to end up doing was going along life and meeting an ex-friend, who's not my friend anymore, but an ex-friend, and we played out the same dynamic. Every single time, this person was always the victim. This person always was going through something, but so was I. And I would sit there and try to communicate what my feelings were. And then that person would go ahead and be like, I mean, yeah, but I'm going through this. Why can't you be more understanding? Why can't you be more this? Why can't you be more that? And eventually I had to learn that my wound of, okay, feeling misunderstood, because I always felt like my feelings never really mattered. So I always had to put other people first. So whenever I would try to communicate, I would always try to cater to the other person and then abandon myself, because emotionally I was abandoned by my own mother. And I had to, not even I had to, but I essentially kept replaying that wound, that subconscious thought within me, which then played out in my relationships. And that relationship crashed and burned, fell through the cracks. So then whenever I learned, oh wow, this is where the wound actually came from, I had to go ahead and nourish myself and actually tell myself, wait, no, my feelings are important. Wait, no, yeah, this person was going through this, but you were going through this. I had to be my own advocate. Which is why it is super important to dissolve your ego, because when you dissolve your ego, you become your own advocate. You start to put yourself first. And not even in a selfish way where you just go ahead and you're like, freak everybody else, I'm just going to put myself first. But you actually start to realize that you are the only person that you will have at the end. You were born into this world alone, and you are going to die alone. Nobody's hopping in your grave. Nobody's hopping into your grave except the bugs that will be eating your body alive. Well, dead. Whenever you're in that grave. So, why not be your own advocate? Why not be that person that stands up for you? Because nobody else is going to do it. I'm not going to say nobody else is going to do it, because maybe you do have familial members, maybe you do have friends, but it'll only go so far, because God forbid if you have a falling out with that person, are you just going to go ahead and attach yourself to another advocate outside of yourself, when you will always be your own advocate and always have a filled cup, and you will never have to worry about that wound? So when it comes to dissolving your ego, how do we do it? How? Because 9 times out of 10, we know why it's important. How do we do it? Number 1, I say shadow work. Shadow work is so important. Just sitting there and being honest with yourself, allowing yourself to be vulnerable. Number 2, I say, is probably the biggest one. Allow yourself to grieve. Because a lot of the times, whenever it comes to your ego, a lot of these subconscious wounds that you have within yourself, these are things that you may have learned from your parents. And you have to allow yourself to grieve. You have to allow yourself to go through those stages, which are denial, bargaining. I skipped one. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. You have to allow yourself to go through that. If you do not allow yourself to go through that, then at the end of the day, you will continue to act out your wounds. And when I say I mean feel them out, I mean to the fullest extent. I know whenever it came to my wounds, especially whenever it came to my previous ego, because I recently went through an ego death with that whole situation that I just described to you guys, I was angry for a long time. So angry. To the point where I thought I was going to lose my mind. I was so sick of being angry. I was so angry at being angry, and I was so tired of being angry. But I kept going. I kept allowing myself to feel those feelings, and it took a long time for me to get over that, which was just an indicator of how deep this wound really was to me, and it was going to take me a long time for me to get over it, which now I have gotten over it. Allow yourself the space, the judgment-free space, to actually just grieve all of those feelings out. And the only way in which you do that leads to my second point, is facing reality. Which is why the first part, when it comes to the stages of grief, which again, people kind of go from different stages. Some people start with anger or bargaining, and you can kind of fluctuate and stuff. But if you are a person that is prone to denial, you have to learn to face reality. Because denial is, at the end of the day, a defense mechanism for your ego. Your ego is trying to protect you, right? But whenever you grow up into an adult, you don't have to protect yourself in that way anymore. You can now protect yourself by being discerning and realizing what works for you and what doesn't work for you, and there's no hard feelings. But when your ego gets hurt, it's like, I'm the problem. But then, instead of actually taking a look at me and being like, wait, I'm the problem. It's like, it's that other person. It's them. It's not me. Because the ego does not like uncomfortability. It likes comfortability. But you have to be honest with yourself. You have to face reality. You have to go through the uncomfortability so then you can actually appreciate the comfortable times that do come. So facing reality is actually very important. Do not sit there and delude yourself. And it's going to be hard to face reality. There are some hard truths. And especially whenever it comes to people who have limerence and fantasy, or kind of look through life through rose-colored glasses, there's a reason why you do that. I'm not sure where I read it from, but I do remember reading an article basically teaching about rose-colored glasses and where it comes from. And they gave a perfect example where, let's say that we have an infant and mom and dad are always supposed to feed that kid. I mean, infant is kind of really, really small for that person to remember. Let's say toddler. Let's go that. Mommy and daddy are always supposed to feed the toddler, right? All the time. But then mom and dad kind of get inconsistent because they have a drug problem, or they're constantly stressed, or they're going through their own things. So us as a kid, that makes us feel unsafe. But instead of saying like, oh, my parents made me feel unsafe and they actually don't care about me, to protect ourselves from that reality, we'll just be like, oh, maybe they're going through that. Maybe they're going through this. And that's where the benefit of the doubt comes from, which will then build into the rose-colored glasses. To the point in which, well, this person goes ahead and they cheat on you. And you're just like, well, we were going through a rough time and I was being like very emotionally draining to this person. I hope you guys are making the connections that I am putting down. But once you face the reality, damn, mom and dad were really going through their own thing. Mom and dad really were drug addicts and they cared more about their drugs than me. Damn, mom and dad, whatever the case may even be. And that made me feel unsafe. And I have to hold them for what they were. They are actually human beings. And unfortunately, they have all these wounds, they have all these traumas, they have all these mindsets, they have all these limitations that I have to accept within them because they have failed to give me this. And once you come to terms with that, you then move on to the next step, which is like, well, I'm an adult now. And I will never, ever, ever feel that way again. I will never feel helpless again. I will never allow myself to feel unsafe again. It really is very empowering, but it also is very peaceful. Another way that you can go ahead and dissolve your ego, which me personally, I do not recommend, but just because I don't recommend it doesn't mean that it's not for you and on your path. But there are substances that you can take that will actually help you dissolve your ego, which one of them is shrooms. I've heard a lot of people take shrooms and then they go on a trip and then they go through an ego death. And the reason why I don't recommend that is because I feel like whenever it comes to substances, they force you to deal with the reality at that moment. You're faced with all the truth at that moment. It can be very overwhelming unless you're somebody that rather deal with it gradually, accept one truth at a time. It's kind of like, for example, you don't know how to swim, and then you're like, hey, Brianna, can you teach me how to swim? And I'm like, yeah, and then I just shove you in the pool and just have you deal with it, and then you learn to swim for yourself. It can be very frightening. It can be very uncomfortable for a lot of people. And not only that, but if you are not mentally strong, you can throw yourself into a very bad spiritual psychosis because your ego wasn't ready to die yet. At the end of the day, whenever it comes to your ego and letting it die, it should be a gradual process. In my opinion, it should be a gradual process. You don't want to force anything. And sometimes we will find that through life, your ego will dissolve on its own. Everybody has gone through an ego death, I feel like. I feel like we always have that one relationship, that one girlfriend, that one boyfriend, that one family member, that one friend that really broke our heart. And then next, you know, we're in the gym, we're doing all these things, we're dyeing our hairs, we're trying new things because we feel like that situation was out of our control. And we find that one thing, our niche, that can help us process those emotions. And once we do, we're no longer that same person anymore. And we view things a lot differently, and we get a lot healthier. At least that's what the process should be. Unless you're hopping from one relationship to another and not allowing yourself to be honest with yourself and doing that shadow work, like I said. But I just wanted to go ahead and drop a little cute video on why it is important to dissolve your ego. What is your ego? Why should we even dissolve it? How can we even do it? So I will go ahead and find some pictures of some books that I read that really helped me during this time whenever it came to dissolving my ego. And maybe I'll leave it in the description. Maybe I might post a picture. Who knows? Maybe. We'll see. But until then, catch you into the next video. Bye.